want this. Here we go. And that, and that. Okay, question number 17. I got it here. Oh, that one was where you're putting in the different address ranges, right? Okay. Yep, yep. And you were having questions about? Okay. Okay. And part of that was actually one last little bit we covered on the lecture back on last Wednesday. We talked about how to set up the address ranges and so forth, and that kind of thing. So, um, mhm, mhm. Okay, fair enough. As you had it handy. All right, that would have been this one here, I think. Problem 8. Okay, doke. All right. Well, I'm gonna go back here one more notch, and I'm gonna give about one more minute. I think if I pull it down 5 minutes early, I don't think I'm gonna kill anybody. I hope. They may have it open already anyway, so we'll do that. Let's go back. There it Bing. Here we are. Go back to chat. That's fine. Okay. All right. So give me a second here. Do that. Yep. And that is now gone. Okay. So we're back to here. And put the mouse back over there so I can see it and you guys can see it. And I think we're about in business. Make it a little better. Okay. It is helpful to know that I'm just a small little icon in the lower left corner there. We'll find out, Colby. If it's problems, I'll get back to you guys. If there's something I can't figure out, I'll send it back. We'll try and clarify it. So, my pleasure. My pleasure. Okay, I'm not familiar with that algorithm. TY? Tie? I'm sure I don't know what that means. Sorry. This is a typo. Thank you. Thank you. I stand corrected. TY. Okay. I learned a new one today. It took me a while to learn LOL, if it helps you, if that makes you feel any better. I was pretty old by the time that started becoming popular. And then ROLOL, right? No, ROL, rolling on the floor. Or ROTL? Yeah, ROL, rolling on the floor laughing. Picked up a few of them since then, but still don't have quite that big vocabulary in that way. All right, we got about 3 more minutes. Boy, I'm trying to think of something fun while we wait. I don't have much luck. Let's see, what would be a good one? I guess we'll just see. I do have some acronym. It is true. They kind of start pulling in one side and dropping out the other at my age. So, but I think I'll remember TY now, probably. Thank you. In TY. All right. Well, we're getting up to a quorum here. Hey, Andrew. Good question. What's up? And the answer is class in about a minute and a half. Good, bad, or indifferent. I'll keep going and do my best. It's a little more challenging to be entertaining with this, doing it over the electronic than it is in person. So hopefully we'll get there somewhere. The other thing is I'm realizing I got my office door open. So if you hear the dog barking in the background, you'll know you hear the dog barking in the background. My wife's around to kind of help ride herd on them, so that should help. All right, I'm down to about less than a minute or so to fire this up here. So a lot of these buses, especially actually all the first four of them, I don't think they even do the old PCI anymore. Historically, we could have said that, but USB you recognize. AGP, they might recognize the AGP port. Worked with that at all? Or was it just PCIe, big one? You've heard of it, okay. Graphics is kind of important in a computer. You still got PCI on your motherboard? How old is that motherboard, Andrew? I might ask. Mid 2000s, so 2000s, like, okay. Yeah, so you're talking about at least 10 years old then, I suppose, aren't you, Andrew? 10 years old is very old, especially for you guys. That's half your age, right? For me, it's just a decade ago. Well, a third of your age. Somebody is 30? Okay. All right. Anyway, that being said, all right, so let's jump into this and cruise on ahead. Very few, what I'm saying is that anymore, I'm talking about if you were to go out today and buy a new motherboard at Micro Center or some other place online, that kind of sort of thing, I don't even know if they're going to supply you with a PCI bus anymore. PCIe bus, there's lots of those, and those are really cool things. We're going to talk a lot more in depth on those than we are kind of the old ones. The old ones are pretty much there. Yeah, this is true. Colby says it would be difficult because his pin configuration is out of date. If you still want to try and bring over an old PCI card, you can't do that. If you've got a new motherboard, you're probably going to buy some new cards to install with it. And so that's I don't even, like I said, I'm not sure you could even buy another motherboard with a PCI card. I'm almost 100% sure you're not going to buy a card with an ISA bus, or an EISA bus anymore, extended ISA bus. And I don't think you're going to find a VESA bus anymore. You might still find a AGP bus. Well, the midterm, I'm going to work on that this coming weekend is the goal. And this time I'm going to try to do it sooner than Sunday. So I'm going to give it a shot at it on Saturday. I'm trying, but it does make me a little bit longer to grade it this way than in ways I've done it in the past. So please bear with me. I will, but the goal is to have it back to you before Monday. All righty, my pleasure. All right, so one of the ways that you can sort of see that this sort of thing is kind of old here is, hang on, sorry. You've only read about AGP. I wouldn't be surprised. I still think there are maybe some. I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't definitively say they're not there anymore. I can pretty definitively say ISA, EISA, and VESA are no longer on the market. And again, I wouldn't be surprised if it would be difficult to find an AGP port as well. Let's talk about them. We'll talk about why they are or are not there. ISA is the oldest of today's computers, and it says, and today's computers still have an ISA bus interface. You can probably scratch that out. I don't think, well, I was getting ready to scratch it out, but I think they still have the front side and the back front side bus. There may be some still. I can't imagine too many things are even using that even as a on the board bus anymore. Originally, it was a slot that you plug things into. PCIe has pretty much dominated the market, and in my humble opinion, it should. And so I don't think there's going to find any. I don't think you could buy a card except like in an old secondhand store with an ISA or an ISA or Visa a card, let alone a slot. Find a motherboard with a slot to plug it into, unless it was at least 10 or 15 years old. And then probably more like for the ISA, I wouldn't be surprised if it's 20 years old. But anyway, all right. The ISA has an 8-bit and 16-bit standard along with a 32-bit version. So it grows from ISA to EISA with a 32-bit version. Again, most of that stuff's all gone. All three versions operate at 8 megahertz, which is like, Cro-Magnon sort of speeds. Okay, it's not something that, I mean, it just, you guys used to gigabit operating speeds, and this is like a 100th of that or less. Anyway, so here's the ISA bus connector. I'm going to make a note to myself. I am not going to quiz you on this. Don't quiz, but I will point out one thing. I'm not going to quiz you. Don't ask about ISA, EISA, or what was the other one? The backup one. I forgot it already. The VESA, VESA. I won't ask any questions about those. Okay. So the one thing I do want to point out something though here, not necessarily to memorize what the pinouts are and everything else. Again, you're not going to worry about them. Well, let's point out two things though here on this particular situation here. First of all, number one is notice that there's two columns with the pin numbers. Does anybody want to try and guess what the two columns are for on a pinout like this, on a card? Plugs into that slot on your motherboard. Figured I'd kind of make you push on this a little bit. It's a slot. There you go. Exactly. Andrew, you're exactly right. Both sides of the card have pins. And so pin 2 would be in this reset would be on the front side of the card. Data 0 probably, which goes in up here, would be on the pin on the back side of the card. So when you plug the card in, you've got pins on both sides, and they connect to the connectors on either side in the connector. So that's why you have column A and column B. And then notice the address range here and the data range. Which particular processor would that probably work best with? 8086. Very good, Colby. And you could even get away with, you might not use all the addresses if you had an 8088. So very good, very good. All right. So when you connect up to the ISA, you're gonna have some these latches here, or flip-flops, or registers basically, are gonna connect back to your 8086. We've got some address decoding. You guys have been doing some of that, I believe, for your project, doing a little bit of hypotheticals, what your 74LS 138 is going to look like, how to program it. We talked a little bit about how to do that back on Wednesday, as well as the address ranges, kind of what the address programming would look like for that. Project is a mess. Good luck. Good luck, Andrew. I think they'll pull you through. They'll work pretty hard on that. So anyway, all right. Okay. You guys can see each other stuff in the chat window too, I assume, right? So, all right. Yep, I thought so. Okay, so let's scroll on to slide number 4. Okay, this is describing what's going on in that previous slide. You've got some 8-bit latches interfacing the ISA to a 32-bit parallel data. You can send them sequentially. DIP switches can be used to change the address that is avoiding address conflicts with other cards in the system. Used to be back in the day when you would plug these guys in, you had to set dip switches everywhere so that your card could work, and you had to pick an address for it, and your computer, sometimes your computer would automatically figure that out, but you had to set the dip switches. And there's text for examples about how to do the programmable logical devices. I did talk to Dr. Patel and everybody about switching it over to the CPLDs instead of the PLDs and working that way. We'll have to see how that works out in the future. Anyway, bottom line is it's still kind of old at this point. 16-bit ESA bus has an additional connector attached behind the 8-bit connector, probably true. And again, although eight additional data bits are available, the features are most often used in additional interrupt requests and DMA request signals. Anyway, we're not going to talk too much about it. So here's a 16-bit ESA bus. For what it's worth, you've got the regular old-fashioned 8-bit connector, and then you'll find that it has a 16-bit extension. What gets interesting is that they're like notches and so forth, and especially this is kind of the beginning, sort of the notches in the card. You guys have seen the cards where there's kind of like a notch, and you can only plug it in one way, which is the goal to keep people from putting it backwards and wrong. Speaking of notches, key, I guess you're going to call it here, you can wind up with this sort of physical sort of thing. We should switch from NASM to ARM for future semesters. There's a lot of things we should do for future semesters. We'll try and work in that direction, but I like the CPLD myself. I think that's probably the most practical or more realistic too. All right, so we got the extended ESA, which has got a couple of extra pins, and who cares, because even the new ESA, extended ESA, is not there anymore, and neither is the VESA. It was the first attempt to make a special type card for plugging in your graphics card. Now, one thing I have learned about over the years, especially having used to have teenagers myself back in the day when computers were coming up online, the thing they all salivated over was getting a new graphics card. So since you guys are still in that same age category, is getting a new graphics card, okay, good. Me too, I still do. Okay, all right. So getting a new graphics card is pretty cool. I never did much with computer games. Don't tell anybody. After I spend all day working on a computer, I don't want to spend the evening playing on one. That being said, yeah, believe it or not. So that being the case, I never did much with that. But I did go out for their birthdays, and we'd buy them new video cards, and they used to really thank us for that. So anyway, that's back in the day. All right, now PCI came along, and now we're starting to get into something that's going to be somewhat relevant and up to date. So we're going to keep both PCI, but I'm going to really focus on PCIe. So be prepared for that. But the PCI bridge was kind of a neat idea. They came up with this whole concept. It was called plug and play. All right. Prior to that, when you plugged a card in, you had to get your dip switches set up to do programming correctly. Boy, I don't know about anybody running an RTX. I can't talk to that, I'm afraid. But all that to say, and we'll let somebody else answer if they got an idea. 1080. Okay. All right. Oh, we're talking graphics cards is what you're talking about now. Gotcha. I'm not the brightest crayon in the box, but sometimes I catch up. I shouldn't have started this conversation. All right. Well, enjoy the graphics cards while we troll on through this other interesting stuff, right? Yeah.
I'm sorry. I couldn't resist.
That's all right. I don't blame you. Not one little bit. 2960. That's pretty cool. So anyway, yeah, I've heard about flexes too. All right. So coming back to the PCI bus for just a moment. The PCI was, until recently, the most common bus found on computers due to plug-and-play characteristics and the ability to function with a 64-bit data bus. All of that was really pretty cool for its day, and it started to kind of break things open. Another key thing that a PCI brought to the table was this kind of sort of commands, a set of commands. And what gets interesting is they've maintained that same command set even into the PCIe, and so we'll talk about that in a minute. But especially when they came up with 64-bit addressing and 64-bit data buses and all kinds of cool stuff, it began to start moving us into the modern era. And finally, you're getting up into tens of megahertz at least. And so you're starting to talk about a little bit more realistic speeds. I remembered working on a PCI interface back in the early mid-90s. And trying to get it to go 66 megahertz was a bit of a challenge. back in the day, but we were working to make sure we could meet a 60 hertz, 6 megahertz bus. It's pretty cool. Some interesting stuff. The other thing then you'll find about a PCI bus is that you've kind of got a bit of a controller, and that then your PCI bus kind of then there's a controller that goes between that and then the microprocessor bus. So we're starting to grow into something that's a little bit more like a system like you see today, and so we'll try and be getting there. We'll try and be getting more and more to that. I'm sorry, looking at the text on the side here. All right, so this interface really doesn't exist anymore, like I said, and even the PCI bus, I don't think theoretically there might still be a motherboard or two out there with a PCI bus on it. But almost everything's PCIe these days, and certainly the lion's share of them are going to be. The PCI timing diagram, again, this is not unusual. And here's another key thing to think about when you think about a PCI bus, and we're going to develop this. We go to PCIe. Can you explain what a bridge means? I'm sorry. Yes, I can. Bridge, basically, we're talking about the controller here. The bridge is that what it said back here, by the way? Where did I miss the bridge term? Bridge, okay. Microprocessor connects PCI bus to an integrated circuit called a PCI bridge, thus making the PCI bus independent of the processor type and architecture. What you're talking about here is this PCI controller. There's a controller that sits between the bus that connects to the microprocessor and the PCI bus that then you plug other stuff into. And again, this same concept exists for the PCIe as well as with the PCI bus. So there's a few things we've taken with the PCI bus and expanded on. The ESA bus, the ESA bus has pretty much gone away. In fact, actually, it's actually good. And I know back in the day they had the printer interface connected to the ESA bus because, a printer can only go so fast. Even the modem, even doing that through the ESA bus is kind of outdated at that point. It's moved up to faster speeds. So they're just hooking things together. I agree with you, Tamora. It's always been fun doing a lot of this. All right, so here's how I want to explain this thing with the PCI bus, though, because, again, a lot of this stuff is going to be pretty much the same, even the PCIe bus, with a slight exception. All right, so bottom line is there's this frame concept, all right? And the frame concept is that I'm going to send an address at the beginning and then sequential data. And in this case, the frame is calling for, and the address oftentimes then, at least in the modern PCIe, I'm not sure if this still existed back in the PCIe thing, but back in the day, you'd pull the frame low and you'd hold it low as long as you wanted to go. These days, the PCIe bus does not have a separate pin for the frame command. What it does is it bundles that in a command word that's up front. And the command word says, okay, I'm about to send you, here's the address, and I'm about to send you, say, 25 data words, and I want you to store those data words sequentially while I'm sending these things. Concept of sending a frame of data. Actually, I think it probably already did exist back in the Ethernet days as well. But this kind of concept of a frame, I'm not just simply sending, address data, address data, address data. What I'm doing is I'm sending an address and then a series of data's chunks, if you will, and I can make them however long I want them to be, up to a certain maximum typically. The concept, I believe, was pioneered with the Ethernet, but again, the idea also has grown then in the PCI bus as well. Is a frame a fixed size? Like, no, well, even a packet isn't necessarily a fixed size. Again, it depends on how they use the packet. You're talking about an Ethernet packet at that point. So it depends on the protocol. Is a frame the same as the concept? Is yes, the frame is the same concept as a packet. There's a set of data, and then different types of frames, different types of packets have different functions. Some of them have fixed data sizes, others have variable data sizes, and so forth. But the concept of a frame, rather than just, okay, I want to send data, 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 expanding that out into a bigger element called a frame is a big part of any modern communication, even going back again several decades. The PCI bus goes back, let's see, I think into the 90s. I believe it goes back to the 90s. So it's probably older than you guys are. But it kind of gave a lot of good gas for things. Like I said, we were designing a PCI bus, I remember, back in the it was mid to late 90s at that point for one of our applications. Okay, the PCI bus commands. Now these are still pretty much available. Okay, there's an interrupt sequence. That's a cool thing to know. You don't need to have an interrupt pin like you guys have been working with, right? You would all do the interrupt, trees and that sort of kind of thing. There's actually a special command that is sent across the PCI bus that's called an interrupt command. And so this kind of doesn't completely take it away from, but there's typically then something on the other side in the microprocessor who's dedicated to looking at the PCI bus, or in the more modern PCIe bus. It keeps an eye out for these interrupt sequences when it sees them, and then interrupts the processor and goes and gets it. I'm not sure what special cycle is. There's an IO read cycle and an IO write cycle. Those are pretty much atrophied. There's not, I mean, it's still a concept. You could still do stuff with it. Haven't seen it used a lot. Memory read and memory write cycle are by far and away the lion's shares of the type of commands that you see out there. I believe the names are self-explanatory. If you have any questions, ask. Configuration read and write, not completely foreign. Again, not very common. Oftentimes, it's not unusual for the configuration to be buried in a memory location, and then you just do a memory read or write rather than a configuration read or write. Memory multiple access, that's probably buried now inside of a memory read or a memory write, where you do multiple datas and so forth. Dual addressing cycle, yeah, I don't think I've seen that used anytime recently. Line memory access, more than again, you don't see a whole lot of most everything's a 64-bit word these days. It's sort of implied that way. Memory write with invalidation, same as line memory access, but used with write and bypass write back function to the cache. Okay, all right. So memory write with invalidation basically is asking for some handshaking. I believe you're talking about there. So we're going to get into the PCIe a little bit more. Here's another concept that the PCI bus brings to the whole thing. Here's the thing I was talking about. You've got this header word, okay, and the header has some specifically designed fields in it, okay, and then in the header field, again, the PCIe is going to be a little bit different than the PCI header field, but the concept is the same. And so what you're going to do here then is you're going to send out your header, which is going to define your device. It's going to pack in your address for where you're sending the information. And then you've got some of this extra ROM address. Now, by the way, we're talking about configuration memory. This is kind of a concept now. What happens is with most of the modern interfaces, and by then I'm talking about anything since the year 2000, most modern interfaces, 90% of the protocol of the communication or the way the bus functions is no longer in the hardware. It's in this sort of stuff, the accepted given the signal that's being sent itself. And if you guys remember, if you guys have ever seen the 7-layer sort of kind of Ethernet sort of kind of pyramid sort of kind of thing, right? From the fundamental level where you are talking about pins and wires and so forth, and even the medium that it travels on, all the way up to a higher level where you're talking about, there's like 7 layers oftentimes, and they kind of mix and match them a little bit. But yeah, 7 layers sort of kind of, I don't have that with me, but I think I've shown that before. I may have shown that back in 212. I can't remember now. But that I may show it in 311. All that to say is that the key, we're starting to get now into an element where the PCI bus configuration space, these are just, the address here is basically, it's when you send your PCI packet, your frame, over, your frame is going to have a series of accesses or a series of chunks of data that are going to get written. And this is going to be like 4 of them, I think, or whatever. That's going to be 14 hex. That's going to be 20, those are 4-bit words, 20 times 32, 20 times 32, whatever that number is, 640 bits are going to make up this base address. and then there's going to be some reserved things. But bottom line is you're going to send each one of these 32-bit words across the PCIe, and you're going to do it in this particular configuration. And the PCI interface defines the configuration, the sequence that you send the information in, as well as the hardware that actually gets plugged into the board. All right. So that's kind of what it is. And then you'll notice there's available here. That's where then you're going to pack your data and send your data across with this header. So basically, you're doing an Ethernet type communication where you're setting up a frame, and then the frame's going to have a sort of certain defined sequences of bits that are sent in a field. And then from that, then the receiver will interpret what kinds of sorts of information then will be following in this the available part, the data part behind it, and we'll unpack that then accordingly. So again, back in the day when I first was coming out of college, for us, the hardware defined everything. You know, you figured out which bits were doing what when. These days, it still is much more programmable, if you will, but you still have to follow a specific set of fields to make them work. That making some sense, I hope? Roll on to the next one. All right. So again, he's explained the PCI interface contains 256-byte configuration memory that allows plug-and-play feature. The plug-and-play is how you is part of that communication. It's not hard-coded anymore. The header contains the unit ID, vendor ID, class code, and manufacturer-defined bits. The vendor ID and the class ID are allocated by. You have to go to a particular vendor to get that allocated back in the day. What is a piece of memory on the graphics card? That is a piece. That's a piece of. Sorry.
The configuration space we were just talking about. That's something that's on the graphics card.
So it depends. It depends. It's how these days. Again, most of it. If you're going to get a good graphics card, probably the configuration space and all that other stuff, it's going to be defined. It's going to be on a PCIe, probably 16. I think. I don't know if they don't. You could theoretically have a PCIe 32. I don't think they do that. I think most of your high speed, and again, let me keep rolling on this. I'll try and answer that question and try and remember to answer it for you, okay? All right, so bottom line is there's these are the defined fields. The defined fields are going to be held in probably in a ROM, and or it's going to be burned into an FPGA. The FPGA is going to have a defined PCIe these days, kind of sort of protocol that's going to capture that. And then the PCIe, again, its frame is going to watch for a particular type of frame that's going to be declared in the first data word or two. And then it's going to unpack that into the data into that particular format as it sees it come across the bus. So we're going to span on this a little bit more, but I want to keep pushing on into this here if I can. All right. The base address space consists of a base address for the memory, a second for the I/O space, and a third for the expansion ROM. Yeah, so you can put. Yeah, I guess you can pack all. That's why they got so much room in the address spacing. They got 3 different addresses they're accessing. When a PCI bus is present, the system BIOS is extended to support it. Back in the day when I believe that the BIOS itself would extend itself even back in those days. The BIOS was what used to control all of the interfacing to and from the bus. That was a big part of the BIOS way back in the day, back in the 90s, 80s and 90s. Again, BIOS handles it is a cool concept, but it's not so much given over to the BIOS anymore. It's a special programmable area that deals with that. So anyway, again, we're talking a little bit older technology here still. We're talking about the PCI interface. So you're talking about where the memory resides and what it does. So the PCI bus comes out, okay? It's sending its data out. I believe that these are going to be different sets of pin ranges. They're going to pick the information out. Possibly, I don't remember much about the PCI bus again, like I say, because it's kind of old. And when I was working with it, it was a long time ago, like before you guys were born. So I'm going to roll on ahead. Okay, here we go. Now I talk about something I'm more familiar with, PCIe bus. All right. Now, we've sort of talked about this before. I remember asking you guys about if you'd ever seen a horse race or gone to Pimlico or something like that and watched a horse race. Some of you had, some of you hadn't, apologies. But for those of you who had, you remember that we talked about trying to get those horses all lined up in the gate, and then you hit the go, right? Brad did, good. All right, yeah, so you get the horses all lined up in the gate, they ring the bell, and bam, they take off and they go racing around the track. It takes almost as long to line all those horses up in that stupid gate before you can hit the bell than it does for them to run around the track. I believe it. So that's kind of part of the concept of why a serial bus is faster than a parallel bus, because the parallel bus, back when they were talking about having 64 or 32 bits wide in the PCI bus or 64 bits in the PCI bus, one of the problems we used to have back in the day was you had to think about the absolute fastest bit and the absolute slowest bit, and you had to slow everybody down to run at the speed of the slowest bit, which has got a philosophical issue I'm going to leave on the cutting room floor for the moment. On the other hand, if, let's say at Pimlico, what they did was every time the first horse got out there, they just take off and go running as soon as they were in place or ready to go do that, then you wouldn't get the thrill of watching them all run side by side, but you could just sit there with a stopwatch and time each horse, and whichever got around the track fastest would win, right? PCIe Express has that concept built in. Rather than having one big, wide, parallel 64-bit bus and having to slow all of the other 63 bits down to the slowest bit that's out there, what I can do instead is make each one of those bits go all by himself and then pump another data bit in serial behind it. And so I can have a serial bus that's just one bit wide, or I could have two serial buses that I run side by side. So now you bring out the horses 2 by 2 and you let them go around and you time them. They're sort of racing each other, but they don't necessarily have to go the same speed. They can still be running independently. So it's an asynchronous, no, I wouldn't call it an asynchronous parallel compute. What I would call it, you kind of send them all out and then you disassemble them all on the back side. You look at each one as an individual lane, an individual sequence. It can go as fast as it possibly can, each one independently. The backside then sees each one of those independently, and then the logic at the back can reassemble those packets and those frames are coming across each one of the buses independently into a bigger monolith of data it's trying to send out. So X1 would have one horse running all by himself, and as soon as each horse got out, you'd send them. X2 means you can send the horses along. Maybe you might have two independent tracks, probably is a better way to think of it. And then you're just timing the horses on the separate tracks. All right. And they might even come out about the same time. They might even finish about the same time. But then you're going to be looking at it. So an X4 would be having 4 racetracks, and each horse has his own racetrack to run on. If that makes some sense. So now you can have another horse that's coming in behind the first horse. So let's say you have 32 horses in your field, right? And you got 4 tracks. You got an X4. All right. What you're going to do is you're going to send out 8 horses to each one of the tracks, and you're going to let them all run completely independent of each other. The thing is that if you send them out one by one, you send the first horse and then the second horse and the third horse, all 8 in a given one of the 4 tracks, right? As you send each one of them out there to run it independently, and you're timing each one of them, you're going to run your race about 4 times faster than you would if you're running all 32 horses in a single track. So the advantage there is that you're still going much faster. You're going pretty much 4 times faster at that point. But you're going much, much faster because each time the horse shows up, you let him go. And then at the backside, you add up all the times and you figure out who won. In this case, at the backside, you gather in all your bits because you know which horse is running on which track, and you're able to correlate the results from each one of those horses. You're able to get a separate report on each one of them, and the logic and the backside computer programs are much faster than the bus. They got plenty of time to put it all back together and say, oh, okay, this one took first place, that one took second place, and the one back on the first track took third place as well. You can make decisions based on that data. All right. Okay. Pot 8-0s. Okay, cute Tamar. I like good jokes though. I appreciate that. I did get some good jokes, by the way, on the quiz. I'm assuming I hope to get some good ones on the midterm coming back. All right. So bottom line is point-to-point communication, serial bus, fewer pins, scalable X1, X2, X4, X8, X16. I don't know if I've ever actually seen an X32. It does theoretically exist. Maybe speaking too fast, but I've seen some X16s. I think that's what we use for a graphics type thing. And if that's fast enough for the graphics card gamers, that's pretty darn fast. They have also, we got a PCIe. There's a PCIe 2, 3, 4. Each one you may guess is able to go faster and faster. Dual simplex connections. Oh yeah, what we're talking about here is that there's one bus going from A to B. There's a second bus going from B back to A for each one of those paths. I believe you. It's very difficult to max PCIe X16 Gen 3 with graphics. That's very true, Andrew. I would have faith in any teenager's ability to max a graphics card. But there's some people, some of them take a little more challenges than others. This PCI Express is really kind of cool in that it's kind of cool in that, number one, it's still around. The one bus I've told you about that's still around. And it's got some interesting features to it. Again, you got to kind of think about it a little bit, but that's kind of how the whole thing works. Packet-based transaction protocol, that's the packet stuff we were talking about. The frame is another way to think about it. I don't know what could max it. Good luck finding one. I'm not even going to try that one. Good luck whoever wants to find it. There's your challenge for the weekend. Go find out if a PCIe X13 Gen 3 has been maxed. I'm sure somebody will claim they've got it somewhere. There's a good website, by the way, that talks. Wiki's does a good job with PCIe, in my humble opinion. That being said, here is the PCIe. Here's kind of pieces of the wiki from the PCIe. All right. Back in the day, okay, so this, by the way, this is from PCIe. This is from the Wikipedia 5 years ago, and even then, the way the PCI thing works out is, you see that you got these this chunk of stuff here in the middle, okay, and then you got these longer things sticking out to the right. Everybody see that? Okay, like the color choice, yellow and black. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So I went to, that's being my school colors. You'll notice how each one of these top 4 have the same kind of chunk thing up front, but they're different sizes. Okay. This is a PCIe 1. This is a PCIe X4. And these two are PCIe X16s. Okay. And by the way, we're talking about the different speeds. I stand corrected. There's a V1, 2, 3, and a 4. 16 giga, I don't know what T stands for. Transfers per second, I believe, is what they're talking about. T's transfer, I think. So 16 lane, a 16 lane slot each direction. I'm not sure what they're saying with that, but anyway, again, this is from 5 years ago, so I wouldn't be too surprised if it's gone past this at this point. All that then to say, and again, remember I was talking about it in the graphic. I said the top one's an X4. The second one down is an X16. You can see the little listed below here. The third one down is an X1, and the one next to the bottom is an X16. And then it's showing it next to a legacy PCI 32-bit slot. And you used to be able to buy boards that still had some of those in it. Again, I don't think you're going to find any more out there, but somebody could look it up online while we're talking and prove me wrong and or prove me right. But I'd be surprised if you couldn't get there. Yes, Matt.
So just make sure I understand. So like the PCI X16 can have 16 frames going to the computer at the same time, and 16 frames coming back from the computer at 16 at one time. So it can handle 32 things happening at once.
Yep, lane slot in each direction. Exactly right. Exactly right, Matt. It can handle 32 serial buses at the same time with an X16. All right. An X1 basically still can do 2 serial buses, but one's going out and the other one's coming back, and they are independent from each other. So that's just basically the way that they do it again. Hope the illustration's been helpful a little bit. Here's kind of how it sort of looks, okay? I kind of have cut and pasted it, but so that chunk up front, right? This little chunk up front, that is universal for any PCIe slot you put down, no matter how long it is. And that's a standardized interface. You've got some of your the T stands for test. There's a test clock, test data in, test data out should be around test data out, and then a test mode select. This is what they call the JTAG sort of kind of connection. It's kind of really cool, the JTAG thing. And your power supply is in here. And I don't remember what the orange is, but you got some 3-volt supplies and some 12-volt supplies, and they still use 12-volt. Then you got the key notch between it, and then if you were to have a PCIe by 1, then you'd only have one copy of this set of serial buses that are used. Okay, this basically is the data going one way, and this the blue here on the left, the pink on the right is the data coming the other direction. So yeah, transmit and receive data. You've got some grounds in there to make sure things don't get too noisy, and then you've got each serial bus has its own reference clock. And again, you notice there's a plus and a minus. These are twisted pair that are again designed to lower the noise. We talked a little bit about how you could put those on a differential kind of sort of area. I don't want to say on a oh boy, it popped right on me. I'll come back and talk about it in a second. Anyway, bottom line is you've got a positive and a negative, a plus and a minus on each one of those as a twisted pair to reduce noise. Why does grounding a pin make what happens is the ground actually, you're not ground, the ground is a wire that goes through this, beside this bus, and it helps to suck away noise to ground. It basically becomes a capacitor, so you wind up with a capacitor between this signal, for example, and the ground beside it. Okay, and I don't know if you remember a capacitor, but a capacitor's goal in life is to, as you got a really high frequency, eventually the capacitor starts to look like a short to a high frequency. So typically noise is pretty high frequency, and so that will then get that noise will get coupled then over to through the capacitor to the ground wire that's beside it. You'll notice that you only need one on either side. A signal with a ground on either side is what you're kind of trying to design in here. You put a ground between every pair of signals, and then that provides a coupler to ground, and it sucks that at a high frequency, suck that high frequency noise down to ground. So anyway, so here's lane 0. You replicate the same thing with lane 1 and lane 2 and lane 3 if you have a 4-lane sort of kind of thing. And then the last couple pins on the back are doing a little bit of unique information as well. But the lanes themselves are pretty much just a copy of each other as they get expanded. No, I don't mean an inductor, because you're right. The wire is an inductor. It becomes an inductor as you're looking down the wire. It becomes a capacitor as you're looking off to the side. Capacitors are going to look, an inductor is going to look like an instantaneous short at a low current, low frequency. It's going to look like an open at a high frequency. The capacitors are the opposite. I'm 90% sure I got that right. You guys can, after a long time, well, we're not talking about a long time. We're talking frequency. We're talking how frequently the signal's changing. When you have a digital signal running at 32 gigahertz, that's a really high frequency. And as a capacitor, it's going to look like a short to ground. We know that now from 306. Cool. Good. All right. So let's see. I got to get you out of here. It started at 5:36:45. Okay, we're not doing too bad. 18 to 28. All right. So the PCIe, remember we talked about some of the same sorts of things are still there. Okay, memory read, memory write are still there. IO read and IO write are still there. Again, I haven't seen a lot of transactions restricted to supporting legacy endpoint devices. Probably pretty much true. It's kind of interesting because when I sit around and I talk with the software architect guys, and we talk about hooking up a PCIe bus, which I did just a year or two back. We sort of said, are we going to use any IO reads or writes? And kind of looked at each other and said, no, I don't think so. Memory reads and writes are the lion's share of the stuff. In fact, I had to tell them about being able to do the, he didn't even realize that there was an interrupt memory or interrupt communication that you could send. He said, wow, that's cool. And I said, yeah, I could sort of tell you didn't know that. So it's like, you're a software guy. You're supposed to know these things. Anyway, configuration read, configuration write. Again, this is used to help set things up. This says, okay, here's what type of card I am. What type are you looking for? What type do you want me to be? Where do you want me to go in my address space? This is the address space I'd like to play in. This sort of kind of information goes back and forth across the configuration reads and write. And then messages, not unlike memory reads and writes, handle like posted writes, used for event signaling and general purpose messaging. Okay, I think, yeah, here's the one that tells a little bit more. So here's kind of, this isn't a complete list, but it's a pretty complete list of the PCIe types of messages. Okay. Now, if you want to learn another acronym, and this may show up on a quiz 4 and or the midterm, is understand what TLP stands for, transaction layer packets. And then these are the types of these are like this would be the term frame would possibly apply here as well, but it's just a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. All right, so you can send a memory read request. You can ask that it locks it while it's sending it back to you so nobody else messes up your communication. You can send a memory write request. And then basically these are kinds of sorts of things that go going back and forth. IO read and requests are still there. Read and write requests are still there. Configuration, no, it's a request. The processor's telling the PCIe thing, hey, can you give me this information, please? Or, okay, can you write the information, please? So it's a polite way to say, please, the request, right? It's like, please, can you do this for me? Likewise with the IO requests. Configurations, here you're setting up the configurations that we talked about. Again, the configuration is the sort of stuff where you're trying to configure the device and so forth. Let's see, message request without data payload. These are, I guess, are going to be, I haven't gotten too much into these, and I haven't seen a lot of them. I'm certain there are definitions of them out there. At most, I would just simply ask you to say, name 4 of the different types of TLP packets that you might see in a PCIe protocol. And I might have you give me both the abbreviated name and the description would be one of the things you'd probably see on a frame. But this is going to be something that's going to be expanded, hopefully, on you guys as you go further down the road. Here's the thing, though, on the next slide, if I may. This is what's kind of cool about the PCIe. It has expanded and gone beyond the idea of just simply a bus and a single point-to-point communication between the CPU and the device. It builds in, there's this concept of a bridge, which we sort of had in the original PCIs. Remember, we saw some of those bridges back then, okay? And so you can go through a bridge to another bus and send information out there. Actually, at this point now, it's a bridge to a PCI bus back in the day when they still had PCIe cards, okay? But the bridge doesn't necessarily have to go to the PCI. PCIe bridge can go to other things too, okay? If you're going to a PCIe device, though, instead of a bridge, oftentimes you're going to have this switch. And you can stick a switch on the end of a PCIe endpoint. You can stick a switch. You can connect a switch to a switch and have stuff going on that, kind of like a USB bus sort of kind of concept. You have this root complex. That's fundamental. The CPU talks to the root complex. The root complex then has PCIe plugs on the outside. A legacy endpoint, what you're talking about is possibly a an endpoint that looks like a PCI or communicates more like a PCI than a PCIe. I'm gonna guess. The other thing too, though, is it's not unusual where you could take away a legacy endpoint and plug in a switch, and now you expand beyond that too. All right. I haven't seen a lot of legacy endpoints. Maybe they were talking about slower PCIe interface. I'm not sure. I know exactly what those are. I'd have to look it up. But again, the PCIe endpoint I'm familiar with, and I've seen that frequently. The switch, root complex. The root complex, you'll also notice that memory is kind of plugged into the same thing too. And oftentimes this is it's still sort of around. You'll see some of this in what they call I think it's been a while. I don't know if they still got the North Bridge and South Bridge. I think they're growing beyond that at this point. But we'll talk about that a little bit as we get into it too. But anyway, all right, bottom line is, here's an example PCIe topology. The point is, PCIe has a topology. What gets interesting is you'll notice up until now, the pictures that we've had of these, backing up a little bit, are built onto the boards, right? But the PCIe has become such a networked type thing with this topology or these possible topologies that the PCIe is now becoming a connection like an Ethernet wire. you go online these days, you can find cables, PCIe cables, that will like plug into the slot and then plug into your card somewhere else. They've developed things where you go from cable to something to another cable. Because the PCIe is so fast, the cables can't be very long, typically 6 to 12 inches. So you're not going to wire one of these things around your house like you would with an Ethernet cable. But still, there's some cabling kind of concepts that PCIe lends itself to, even that are not unusual to see these days. All right, so PCIe growth, actually more PCI, the original PCI stuff, 2002, I guess, is when the PCIe first came out as a standard, and then they grew to 2, 3, 4, and 5 in 2019. So that's a fairly up-to-date table. Now, maybe that was what they were projecting back then. I don't know. I haven't touched this slide. Maybe I did. Oh, I'm sorry. I did add this slide. Just added this slide just for this particular. I forgot I did. That tells you how old I'm getting. So I think I added this slide. I stole it from Deepak. He had it. And I was like, yeah, it's got a little bit more modern information on it. There is a hyperlink if you want to go look at the kind of some more ideas about the PCI Express from somebody other than me, and kind of what the future growth of it might look like. It's a really cool internet bus. Very, very popular, and it has every right to be. It should be. All right, this one is also a fairly popular bus. You guys still see these. What was kind of cool and revolutionary in the day was when they added a 5-volt and a ground as part of the bus itself. This is a completely serial bus. The difference between this and the PCIe is that this would be like a PCIe X1, and that's the biggest you can ever be, which isn't, I mean, I don't think I've seen a whole lot go beyond the USB bus. It's become very, very well established. The future will tell. You guys, if I'm still around 10 years from now and you come back to visit me, I might be talking about something else. But for now, the USB is pretty standardized. You guys have probably grown up with this, I'm assuming. I'll look for some feedback from you guys. And you guys remember a time before the USB bus? You kind of grew up with this? Yeah, I believe it. Can't remember a time before it. Okay. You're kind of young, Annie. Okay. All right. So anyway, you guys know that you can plug. The one thing about another USB is you can plug in up to 127 different connections via 4-wire serial connection. Okay. So you can plug a USB hub into a USB hub into a USB hub and still talk to all those guys if you really want to. Be a little careful. Probably going to get a little more slowed down if you do that, but you could do that. The interface is ideal for keyboards, sound cards, modems. The one thing that you're not going to plug into a USB bus, unless you're extremely Byzantine and you really don't care and you're old like me, you're not going to plug your AGB graphic. You're not going to plug your graphics card into a USB because that's going to be way too slow. But it goes pretty quick. It goes pretty kicking when it comes to transferring data and that sort of thing. Cable links are limited to 5 meters. Okay. Let's see. Love daisy chaining USB-C. In terms of speed, I guess you're asking about, Matt. Oh, you're talking about the form factor when you're talking about USB-C. Yeah, I mean, the form factor, I think this one down here is another form factor USB. This is the standard USB form factor. You guys have seen this that's out there. But there are several different types of USB. You got a USB-C graphics card. They are getting faster. He means you can hook up an external GPU to a USB-C that supports PCIe. Yes, that's probably true. Probably true. So, but bottom line is, you remember I told you about how it's become pretty much all software. The software that supports a USB, the standardized protocol and packets are pretty sophisticated. The hardware is pretty simple and pretty basic. And there has been work to bring more and more of the USB standardized packet into like a FPGA or something that can recognize it and communicate with it directly rather than needing a processor to back up behind it. So you're finding kind of a mix. It still tends to push it more back into the software, the USB communication, rather than trying to take care of it in the firmware or the FPGA front end. But there's a fair amount of going on in that too. You can certainly buy the packages and or gin them up yourself. This thing is gonna be. I think I don't know if I got it. Yeah, in our ZI. Okay, all right. I think somewhere in here I might play with the NRZI. All right, I'm not going to guarantee it. We're not going to get into this much more, but for the moment, we're going to kind of bookmark this for the moment. The big thing we're looking here is, there you go. Come on, brain, why am I not coming up with it? My favorite, one of my more favorite devices out there. Plus minus differential. Where am I? I'm drawing a blank. Somebody help me out here. What's this particular design? Op amp. Thank you. I could not get operational amplifier. It was not going to come to me. Op amp. Okay. Yep. Op amp. Operational amplifier. OPAMP. Elijah's right. Andrew's got a little typo in there, but Elijah's right. Operational amplifier. Why my brain wouldn't come up with that? We'll talk about that in just a second. I got pretty fat fingers myself, I'm afraid. All right, so here's the concept with, we were talking, this lends itself not only to explaining a USB, but also to explaining what we're talking about with, remember how with the PCIe bus, there's a plus and a minus signal for each one, for each of the two paths. It's called it's a differential path, differential wire. You run them side by side with each other. You can have some specifically built-in noise suppression. The concept of an operational, of a differential path is that most of them, if the two wires are close to each other, whatever noise function couples into one wire is going to be pretty much the same noise function that's going to couple into the other wire. So that if you've got a big noise spike or something, both the wires are going to increase and decrease in size. You don't really care. It helps eliminate a lot of the noise that shows up if you run it into an operational amplifier. Because if this one is low in relationship to this one, the op amp will pick it up. If the top one is high and the bottom one is low, the op amp will pick it up going in the opposite direction. Any noise characteristic is going to increase both of them or decrease both of them the same. What you're looking for is the original difference between the two signals. And that's why we have this differential pair. That's almost everywhere these days. I mean, you're not going to find it inside a chip itself. And actually, I won't even go so far as to say that, because it's not unusual to find a differential pair in these days where you got 64-bit buses running all over your chip. But still, you know, you're gonna almost anything that's going to be a communications device. USB, you'll notice, has differential. PCIe has differential, and you'll notice they're both standing. A lot of the other stuff is not. Okay. All right. So data packets are sent and received using an NRZI, non-return to zero inverted data encoding. I used to have a slide that shows how that all works, and I may quiz you on that. I may have one. I'm not going to promise you we're not going to have one later on. But I'm not going to try and explain it a lot right now. Again, the purpose of the NRZI of the data packet is so that you don't have a wire go low for 30 zeros or high for 30 ones, okay? Because some of this differential stuff capability goes away if you don't have transitions going on. The other thing that having transitions on your wire does is it helps give you a notion of what your frequency of your bus looks like, and that's kind of important too. You could, that way you can, what you can do is, and what they do in fact do with the USB is, because you have this non-return to zero, a 0 or a 1. So for example, let's see here. Here you got two zeros beside each other. Bottom line is you'll get enough pulses that are just a single clock wide that you can rebuild your clock at the other end just by timing how wide each of your high or your low pulses are, and knowing that they're going to be some multiple of each other. So as long as you keep this multiple small, you can do what they call reconstruct your clock from the data wire itself. You'll notice that the USB has no clock. It just has simply positive and negative data. And it has no clock because it uses the NRZI protocol to pull out the clock at the other side and then time the data from that. So it's kind of cool, the NRZI concept, and then being able to reconstruct your clock at the other end. Then all you have to do is send your data. You'll notice that the PCIe also had that. The PCIe Express, going back to the pinout, you will see that there's no clock going on any one of these serial things. He's doing the same thing that the USB. It's just like you have four USBs in parallel to each other when you're talking about a PCI Express sort of thing, roughly speaking. Again, a lot of this is very established and standardized type communications technologies. Your Ethernet cables. Let me do this real quick here. I got a minute. Any of you guys ever like peeled off the covering around the Ethernet cable and look at the wires inside? Okay. Colby, what did you see when you did that? Can you tell everybody else? Matt, you too? Of course, Matt, you would. What did you see for the wires? You remember any of the colors on them? See if I can get something here real quick. Anybody remember? All right, let's see if I can find the colors. Okay, I see red, green, brown, and orange. I think that's probably right. Hang on, let's see if I can get this thing to work here. Sorry, hang on. I don't want to lose you guys, and let's just do this here.
I have a live example. I've caught one.
Okay. What do you see for the colors on the end? Flip it around and look at the colors.
I'm making it so you can see it. I can't both show you and see it myself.
Okay. All right. So look at it yourself now. I appreciate you showing us. Look at it yourself now. What colors do you see? Blue and a blue and white, green and a green and white, I think. Orange, or there's 8 different colors, says the wires. Let's see here. Okay, middle school we used an Ethernet as a wire for a remote control. Yeah, probably you would have for a robot. Yep. Hang on, let's see here. Images, Ethernet color code. There you go. All right, put this up there. That's what you would see. See the wires here? There's an orange and white, a green and a white, a blue and a white, and a brown and a white. And so what you're working with here is the whole purpose of this is as soon as it goes away from your connector and it goes into the cable itself, each of these color pairs gets twisted together. So you're still working then with the, put that out of the way. You're still working then with the concept of a wired pair, except that you've got 4 wired pairs and an Ethernet cable. So everything is data plus and data minus. Everything is a differential wire, a differential signal. Everything's differential signal these days. PCIe, the USB, and the Ethernet are all twisted pairs. Okay, had to wire my parents home with Ethernet. I did that myself so that I can talk across the bus faster. All right. So now, one other thing that they do, not uncommonly, is they do what they'll add what's called a stuffed bit. Okay. And what you're doing is you're going to say, okay, I'll let you stay high for just a certain limited number of times. And if you see more than 6 ones, I'm going to force you to stick a 0 in there so I get a transition and I can work to capture my clock. So anyway, all right. So since transmission receiver must remain synchronized, a large string of ones do not generate impulses. A bit may be stuffed. I would say even more than maybe, it typically is. 8B, 10B, not unusual communications protocols. I'm trying to remember. I think it goes across it does go across USB. I can't remember now what it goes across. But bottom line is you take an extra bit or 2 for each byte of data that you send, and you make those bits and you create a special encoding that will guarantee that you're not going to have a long string of 1s or 0s. It's kind of, if I can find that. Well, it depends if I have enough time or anything. You guys hang around. I'll try and see if I can find the 8B, 10B encoding sort of stuff. Anyway, all right. So we've got this series of 1s. You got the NRZ. Here's a bit added to force change the line, signal line. USB commands. Communication begins with a sync byte, followed by a packet identification byte. So again, we're talking the framing sorts of things that are coming and going. The PID contains 8 bits. The rightmost 4 bits contain the type of packet that follows, if any. So again, this is this framing sort of concept. There is a protocol for the USB that is also built in, and I'm going to go a lot into it. PIDs are for token indicators, data indicators, and handshaking. So these are some of, remember, we're sending these values in serial. So E1, for example, is going to be 8 bits in sequence. The first 3 bits in the sequence are going to be ones. The following, the fourth one is going to be a 0. The next 3 are going to be zeros, and the last one's going to be a 1. And E1 is going to be sent serially across it. Remember, we talked about serial communication. Parallel, really, you don't see as much anymore. And there's good reasons for that, like we were describing. So these are kind of some of the PIDs that can come across. Here's what the name of that particular PID is, the type, and the description about what it does. You might even be stalled as you're doing your communications. Formats of the data token, handshaking, and start of frame are as follows. Again, these are definitions of how the USB works with his framing, a little bit different than the PCIe framing and or the Ethernet framing. Very much a real part of life. All right. Again, I don't think I quizzed people too much on this. You're going to do this sort of thing only if you're really getting into it. All right, so I think, why don't we go back? We went back and talked about the CRC, 5 bits of, okay. So the point is that the USB has a specifically defined CRC that it uses for a 5-bit communication and for a 16-bit communication. And when we talked about how to do these polynomials and how to build them as a set of FIFOs, and that was one of the questions that we had as a bonus question on the midterm. When is the next quiz? Oh, good question. I don't remember offhand even. Hang on, that's a good question. It deserves a very specific, quick answer. Give me a second, I can get there. Very good question. I think we've got, next quiz is Monday, the 27th of April. So we've got a little bit of time yet. Okay? April 27th. Yeah, April 27th. I can confirm that. I've got that on the calendar over here. All right, so the handshaking PID packets are used to signal errors between the transmitter and the receiver. So what happens is that we were asking about CRCs and why we use them. This is one of the things we use the CRC for. A CRC, depending on how you cook it up and how you put it together, and there's some math to show it. I'm not going to go into all that, but there's some math to show a CRC is kind of like a fingerprint. Okay, and I think we're talking with you guys some time back about the fact that while not all fingerprints are exactly unique, they just only get repeated once every 10 million people or so. Okay, all right. So in a country that has 320 million people, there's probably about 10 to 15 people out there that actually have the same fingerprint that you do. The odds of them living close by and committing a crime are extremely small. So, but bottom line is they're not completely unique. And the same thing goes for a CRC, especially when you got a smaller one, like a 6-bit one like this one, or a 5-bit CRC token packet. When you get to 16 bits, it becomes much more unique. It's 2 to the 16th power, much more than that, because it's mathematics. It goes much, much higher than that. A 16-bit CRC is going to be pretty unique. So you've got, with a 16-bit CRC, you've got how many unique combinations? It's not just 16. It's because they're kind of scrambled up. I can't remember how to do that, but I can't reason my way out of this one fast enough. Bottom line is that when you're talking about a 16-bit CRC, pretty much going to be unique for any data stream you're going to send. And if the CRC that you send at the end of your data stream doesn't match the CRC that the receiver computes, then he basically looks at it and says, okay, something happened, and he'll send a NAK, a command back then down on the other side of the USB and say, hey, didn't get your data packet, please send it or resend it so that I can get it right. Stop and wait flow control, since the transmitter must wait for the ACK before sending any additional packets. So he's either going to send an acknowledge or a not acknowledge back down the wire, and then the host will hopefully then resend everything. All right, we're getting there. I'm sorry, I was not drawing pictures. NAK versus ACK here. All right, so I'm going to skip to this slide. I'll back up to the previous one. So this is becoming a bit old-fashioned these days. And again, because most everything's kind of tending to go to the PCIe bus, and I believe the North and the South Bridge are beginning to be merged. But back in the day, what you used to have was called the front side bus, which connected your CPU to the buses and everybody else. And then the North Bridge was specifically kind of designed to handle the fast stuff, okay? The memory, coming in and out of the memory, you wanted to have a good fast interface there. And again, for you gamers who are doing having your fun talking about your AGP, your graphics cards, this graphic card is plugged straight into the North Bridge as well, so it could pipe straight into the processor. And for those of you who like graphics and we're listing all the cool graphics cards, the AGP bus, you can say, thank the good Lord for an AGP bus, okay? Actually, now it's a PCIe X16. But back in the day, it was pumped straight into the North Bridge and from there straight into the processor, okay? So this was kind of the topology it's getting a little old. I don't know if you're even going to find too much of it anymore, but it will not be unusual if you go into, say, I believe a Microsemi house or you're talking online. Somebody can look this up for me and find out how if they saw the North Bridge and the South Bridge. North Bridge is the fast interface. But that also then had a bridge to the slower interface where your older PCI bus sorts of things were at, your older legacy cards, and also then to your hard drive. Because when the hard drive gets fired up, it's sending stuff. But again, it's sending it in a highly serial or highly protocol fashion. It doesn't have to be all that fast. The front side bus, the North Bridge sort of kind of things, you're dealing with a little bit more disjoint communications and trying to get them go faster. All that then to say, backing up to the previous slide here now, slide 27, the last one of the night. I might even let you get me out a little early tonight. Here's the AGP graphics port. And there's some specifically defined chipsets that worked with the Pentium 2, which was back big in the day, okay? And you got a similar type sort of dynamic going out here. You got a PCI bus coming out the one side of this chipset. You've got the AGP port going straight into the Pentium, again at a high rate of speed, and then the memory also. It's showing this thing turn 90 degrees from what I had in the last page. And then you got your buses and stuff out here doing your interfaces to your external cards. It even shows an old eSupport, but you're not going to find one anything you can buy these days. So this even is getting to be a little bit old-fashioned, but it still does a pretty good job of showing the North Bridge and the South Bridge. And those were around 5 to 10 years ago, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, North and South are getting definitely more merged these days. You don't see it quite as much like you used to in the old days when you had a little more polarized stuff. But and they're searching around. They're always looking for newer and better topologies. Air codes still show separate ones, though. I'm not too surprised. You might even see the functionality merged into the same chip these days. And again, but still the chip it's internally is segmented into a North Bridge and a South Bridge part, possibly. Memory errors will give you North Bridge error. I believe it. I'm not surprised. I'd agree with you, Andrew. So anyway, so that's kind of most of the lecture for tonight. What was the one thing I was promising I was going to show you guys when I got to the end here, and I didn't get that far? I'm just going to show you we showed you the color codes on the Ethernet. Oh, come on, guys. I'm getting too old. What was the thing I told you I was going to show you as we were chugging along? Oh, yeah. I'll worry about it later. I'll build it in some other time. Wikipedia says since 2012, Intel has used a system agent that is physically on the chip that replaces the North Bridge and the South Bridge. I believe it. I wouldn't be too surprised, though, if the Intel has separate pieces of the chip, though, that handle the North Bridge and the South Bridge communication individually. This is probably back in the day when you probably didn't have as much room on a chip as you do these days. Chipset IIRC. Okay, I'll buy that, Andrew. Thank you. All right, so should I let you go 4 minutes early? Yay, you're all screaming and running off. If I recall correctly. Okay, all right. From where I'm sitting at the moment, this does the lecture. Again, I'm going to try and get all your things graded back to you this weekend. I'll email stuff back to you. I don't think I put your grades up on Blackboard. I'll try and do that. But again, all right. Any other questions from anybody? Have mercy on my grade. Guys, I try and do merciful. I try to be merciful with your grades. I try to be fair, but I do try to be merciful. Oh, one last thing for those of you who are still here. Please, 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 please thank your proctors for me. You may have had a different one each time. Mercy on all of us. I will do my best. Have mercy on your proctor. Thank them profusely for me, please. I'm just so impressed and so pleased that they've been hanging in there with you guys. And I know it's not an easy to sit around while somebody's taking an exam. I've done it a few times. So anyway, thank your proctor for me, please. And looking forward to getting 2 more proctoring sessions out of them. And with that, she's studying to be a teacher. Fair enough, Colby. Fair enough. If you're studying to be a teacher, then a proctor is a logical step on that path. I'll concede that and agree with it. Thank your proctor who's studying to be a teacher, and bless her heart, as the Southerners say down here in Maryland. Okay, I think that's about it. Any other questions? Otherwise, I'm going to sign off myself.
Can I throw a bit of a request out there? Not so much a question. Would it be possible for you to, in next lecture at some point, do a little teeny review of connecting memory chips together for the bus supposed to do for this project?
Right.
I was looking back over the sides and I realized what we're supposed to do for the assignments actually a fair amount different than what the slides go over, because the slides only talk about one chip, and that one chip isn't big enough to handle what we need to accomplish for this. All
right, I'll cook up something on memory region protocol, or memory region mapping is what I'm going to say here. All right, I will try and I'm making a note. I'll try and slip that in. I think the other thing I wanted to add in is I'm going to try and slip in a bit about the NRZ encoding. That was the thing I was going to show you, was 8B, 10B. All right, I'll slip a slide up for that one in too, I think, for Monday. Okay. Any other questions, thoughts? Everybody, have a good rest of your week. Stay safe, as we've been saying these days. And I'm going to go ahead and bring down the meeting. My pleasure, Timur. All right, everybody, we'll see you. Take care. Bye-bye.